honor to open the special session organized in the honor of Professor Anna Cienciala. The subject of our meeting is next Katyn massacre, sources, materials in former Soviet Union, Russian Federation, Great Britain and United Peace. Looking on it from the organizational point of view, let me ask you what language could be approached by the participants of this session. Some of us speak English, some of us speak Polish. We will start with the English version of text prepared by Natalia Lebedeva, Russian historian, member of Academy of Sciences of Russian Federation, person which contributed to the discovery of truths on Katyn massacre in very large scale. She was one of the first historians and people outside offices of the Soviet regime, repressive regime, which get the contact with documentation, opening the discussion and the way to the truth on this subject. Natalia didn't participate in this meeting. It was earlier organized, and she expected that we'll pay a visit to Poland and participate in two important events. This Congress and meeting on meeting of Polish-Russian group of historians busy with the difficult questions, the special body. Due to the Ukrainian crisis, the meeting of Polish and Russian historians is postponed question forever or temporarily. We will see. Natalia Lebedeva is to be our first speaker. Another speaker is Professor Wojciech Materski, Professor of Academy of Sciences, historian, specialist, most brilliant specialist on Polish-Russian relations during the interwar period and period of Second War. Specialist in the border questions concerning the international security and cooperation. Between others, his studies were devoted to the, for example, functioning of United Nations. Professor Wojciech Materski closely cooperates with Natalia Lebedeva and other colleagues to discover the truth on Katyn massacre and publish these 4 volumes. Documents of murder, documents of crime. 3 of them include only Russian materials, materials from Russian archives. In this piece of Professor Wojciech Materski, we will find a lot of information concerning these 3 volumes. Next speaker after Natalia Lebedeva, the text of Natalia Lebedeva, excuse me very much, this text will be presented by our colleague Piotr Kosicki from University of Maryland. Natalia provided us with this paper open. Then some information on behalf of Head Office of State Archives in Poland, institution responsible in this country for discovering the truth on Katyn massacre, and editor of these volumes. On her own request, we oppose this proposal. Madame Krystyna Turkowska, independent researcher, will present a presentation. As I know, it will be filmed and commented on American and Western witnesses of Katyn crime. You have details in the short booklet concerning the program of Professor, please.
I regret tremendously that Dr. Lebedeva is not here to present her own work. In part, I have to apologize and ask for your indulgence because we received several different texts from her, and the one that I'm going to read to you I saw for the first time 3 minutes ago. So, and it's actually quite long, so I will be skipping around some of the longer fragments of acronyms for different organizations and regiments, etc., in order to try to maintain the rigor of the time for the panel. The title of the presentation, can you all hear me all right? Yeah, okay, great. The title of the presentation that Dr. Lebedeva had wanted to give today is Katyn Massacre, The Way to the Truth. And it's really a recapitulation of her first years of approaching research into the area. This report is devoted to searching for the truth about one of the most monstrous crimes of the Stalinist regime, the shooting of 21,857 Polish officers, policemen, and prisoners of jails of Western Ukraine and Western Belarus. It was Mikhail Gorbachev's campaign for glasnost that led to public discussion of the Stalinist period in the USSR and to research into this issue. In the spring of 1987, during Wojciech Jaruzelski's visit to Moscow at his initiative, two leaders agreed to set up the Joint Commission of Soviet-Polish party historians to study quote-unquote blank spots in Polish-Soviet relations. This was duly established in May of '87. Polish historians set themselves the goal of finding the truth about Katyn, about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and other painful issues. But the Soviet archives remained closed, and Soviet historians on the Joint Commission had no mandate to reveal new documents to buttress the old Budenko Commission report about Katyn. Most of the party Politburo members from the Soviet Union opposed changing the party line in this regard. A year later, in May of '88, Polish historians analyzed the Budenko report and delivered to their Soviet colleagues a devastating critique. The critical dates of the anniversary of 1939 to 40 were approaching. Discussion on the blank spots of Polish relations with the USSR was becoming more and more strident. Many scholars and writers were stating that the Soviet Union was guilty of the deaths of Polish officers who had been shot in the spring of 1940. Now, in March of 1989, Soviet Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze, Valentin Falin of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and KGB Chairman Vladimir Kryuchkov proposed Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that it admit the truth about Katyn. Valery Boldin, head of the General Department in the party, wrote in his memoirs that month Gorbachev asked him to find documents about Katyn. Boldin brought him 2 sealed envelopes. Gorbachev opened them, looked quickly at the documents, resealed the envelopes, and said, "One concerns the real circumstances of the shooting of the Poles at Katyn. The other contains the conclusions of the commission which studied the matter after the liberation of the Smolensk region, still during the war." He told Boldin not to show them to anyone without his knowledge, saying this is a hanging matter. Now, Yakovlev has written about the commission of Soviet and Polish scholars as follows. A long-term searching campaign started on the basis of letting things slide. The Polish part of the committee pressed Smirnov, and he in his turn called on me to assist in searching for documents. Every time Mikhail Sergeyevich, answering my various appeals, reacted with one word: look for it. It lasted so very long. But once this lack of clarity passed, Stankiewicz came to me and told me that the historian Natalia Lebedeva, working with materials about troops from convoys, had unexpectedly found information about Katyn. End quote. In 1969, now I'm speaking as Dr. Lebedeva, being a postgraduate student of the Institute of History, I've been working on a dissertation on the Nuremberg trial. In the Central State Archive of the October Revolution, today State Archive of the Russian Federation, I studied the materials of the Budienko Commission and the German documentation of the Katyn crime. There I found letters of Budienko to Molotov and Schwernik dated September 1943, which seemed to confirm that the crime had been committed by Germans. I hardly incorporated them into my book, The Preparations for the Nuremberg Trial. Though my supervisor, a past secretary of the Soviet delegation at Nuremberg, stopped me when I began to do this. You know, Natasha, he said, this is a dark matter. Don't touch it until you puzzle your way through it. I needed almost 20 years to find the documents that allowed me to come to an unequivocal conclusion about who was to blame and to recover all of the details. One particular event helped. In the late July of 1988, the journalist Vladimir Abarinov called me and told me about the letter by Alexei Lukin, a former officer of the battalion that guarded the Kozhelsk camp in 1939 and 1940 and transported POWs. The letter was forwarded from the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs to Literaturnaya Gazeta. Lukin denied that the battalion had any part in the executions. Only one point was important in his letter, the number of the battalion. I graduated from the Moscow State History Archival Institute and knew where to find the battalion's records. I explained this to Abarinov, but he did not go there. The journalist only wrote to the archive. Of course, they answered that their archive didn't have any records on Katyn. After that, I asked for and received a letter from the head of the Soviet head of the Joint Commission of Party Historians to that archive, and permission from the chief of the internal staff of the USSR Army to do research on documents of NKVD convoys. And as a result, I obtained access to the archival materials and found the records of the 136th NKVD Convoy Battalion, which had escorted the Kozhelsk prisoners to Katyn in April and May of 1940, as well as the records of the main administration of the NKVD convoy troops. There was the battalion order book with departure dates from Kozhelsk to Smolensk and Gniezdovo, dates that tallied with the execution dates of Kozhelsk POWs. I learned that directives from them came from the administration for prisoners of war, whose documents were in the same archive. I asked Professor Vladimir Volkov, head of the Academy's Institute of Slavic and Balkan Studies, for authorization to work with those materials, but it was given instead to someone else, Valentina Parsadankova, an employee of that institute and of the Joint Commission of Soviet-Polish Historians. A little later, I got access to these materials, as did a few other historians. Following a study of many large bodies of archival material, I was able to start reconstructing in detail the terrible tragedy of Katyn, of both the Polish and the Soviet peoples. On February 23rd, 1990, the head of the International Department of the Central Committee, Valentin Farin, wrote to Gorbachev. A number of Soviet historians given access to the collections of the Special Archive and the Central State Archive of the main archival administration have brought to light hitherto unknown materials, as well as the administration of both the prisoner of war administration and the administration for convoy troops for 1939 and 1940. These are related to the so-called Katyn question. On the basis of newly documented facts, Soviet historians have prepared materials for publication. Some of them have already been approved by editorial boards and accepted to be published. They're scheduled for this year. The appearance of this publication would clearly create a new situation. Our argument that no materials have been found in the state archives of the USSR uncovering the true underpinnings of the Katyn tragedy would become unconvincing. The materials uncovered by the scholars will undoubtedly reveal only part of the secrets in comparison with the data on which the Polish side bases its judgments, but this will not allow us to stand by the old versions and will avoid putting an end to this question. In view of the approaching 50th anniversary of Katyn, we should define our position one way or the other." End quote. Most of the Politburo members, unsurprisingly, were opposed to discovering the truth about Katyn. Only Yakovlev consequently yearned to make the materials discovered by historians known to the wider public. At his request, the director of the Institute of World History gave him my article and the text of more than 70 of the most important archival documents that I had uncovered and retranscribed. Quote, "I shall report," end quote, a member of the Politburo said. Whom could he report to? Naturally, only to Gorbachev. Soon, Yakovlev called several of the academicians and told them that Lebedeva could publish her article, and Gorbachev made no objection. But in late February of 1990, the Politburo voted not to allow Russian historians to publish articles based on archival documents about the murder of Polish POWs in the spring of 1940. My colleague at the Institute of World History, who also happened to be a member of the Moscow City Council, sent my article nonetheless to the newspaper Moscow News. In late March, the main results of my studies were published in that paper. There was an interview with me entitled The Katyn Tragedy. This interview, published without the permission of the government, had the effect of exploding a bomb. Valentin Farin called Chubaryan and threatened that Lebedeva would never be allowed access to any archive or permitted to go abroad or allowed to publish even one line. He wanted Chubaryan to call England, forbade me to give any interviews. I had gone in the mid-March of 1990 to the UK to work at Oxford for several weeks. But our director said that if he did so, Lebedeva would give interviews to everybody, and if he did not, she would not give any. Furthermore, I had learned that several people had already lost their jobs in connection with this matter. Now, it seems that the interview in Moscow News had given a push to the Politburo to reverse its earlier decision not to allow the publication of articles and documents on Katyn. Stankiewicz and Chubaryan were urgently detailed to Poland. The first for reconnaissance on the ground of possible reactions, the latter to deal with academicians and historians in the profession. The day after my return to Moscow, the whole situation changed. On April 13th, 1990, which was the 50th anniversary of the official German radio communique revealing the Katyn graves, Jaruzelski was in Moscow on a state visit. That day, at the reception in the Polish embassy, Gorbachev handed over to Jaruzelski the NKVD dispatch lists for the POWs, who had been executed in April and May of 1940. On the same day, TASS stated, I'm quoting here, historians of both countries have conducted careful investigations of the Katyn tragedy, including the search for documents. Most recently, Soviet archivists and historians have discovered documents about Polish servicemen held in the NKVD USSR camps of Kozielsk, Ostashkov, and Starobiec. These documents show that in April and May of 1940, out of approximately 15,000 Polish officers held in these three camps, 394 were moved to Gryazovets camp, while the majority were, and it's a double quote here, placed at the disposal, end double quote, of the NKVD administration in the Smolensk, Voroshilovgrad, and Kalinin oblasts, and do not appear later in any statistical records. That's the end of the quote from TASS. Beria and Merkulov were named as personally responsible for the evil deeds in the Katyn forest, described as one of the heinous crimes of Stalinism. 1 month later, my article, The Katyn Tragedy, was published in International Affairs. At that time, the Progress Publishing Group concluded an agreement with me to publish my book, or the book, Katyn, A Crime Against Humanity. By the summer of 1991, the monograph's manuscript was ready, and the first 2 chapters also went to Warsaw, to the printing house Czytelnik, to be published in Polish. In late August of 1991, August 19th, the day of the putsch, through the Polish embassy, I sent the manuscript of the last chapter of my book to Warsaw. Of course, I understood how its publication in Poland could turn out for me, in the case that the putschists ended up coming to power in Moscow. Fortunately, their way to power was blocked. In 1994, my monograph was published in Moscow. Czytelnik had prepared its translation in Polish already by 1991, but because of financial difficulties, it didn't end up publishing the book. Instead, it was released in Warsaw in 1998 by the publishing house Bellon. In November 1990, Gorbachev ordered the Office of the Soviet Prosecutor General to speed up the investigation of the fate of Polish officers held in the 3 special camps. is connected with the visit of Polish Foreign Minister Skubiszewski in that same month in 1990. NKVD workers involved in the Katyn crime, who were still alive, had been questioned, including Piotr Suplenenko, the head of the UPV, and the head of the Kalinin NKVD Tokarev. It was clear from witness depositions that there was a decision of the Central Committee signed by Stalin to liquidate the POWs held at Koziel's, Ostashkov, and Starobielsk camps by the Ukrainian NKVD. The Office of the Soviet Prosecutor General had agreed to the Polish request for exhumations with the participation of Polish experts at the burial sites. This began in the summer of 1991. Now, the most important documents of the Katyn massacre, and I'm not going to read their full titles here because it would take several minutes, but Beria Memorandum from the 3rd and 5th of March, resolution of the Politburo from the 5th of March, and the Alexander Shelepin letter dated March 1959 were hidden in the secret archive in Kremlin, yet more than 1 year later, handed over also to Lech Wałęsa only on October 14, 1992. Earlier, in December 1991, Yakovlev had been present in the Kremlin when Gorbachev handed power over to Boris Yeltsin. Along with other very important papers, Gorbachev handed Yeltsin the so-called Package N1, containing Beria's letter to Stalin and the Politburo decision. He said that it was necessary to discuss what to do with them and added, I'm quoting, "I'm afraid they can lead to international complications. However, it is up to you to decide," end quote. Yeltsin read the documents and agreed that the matter would have to be seriously considered. Yakovlev was shocked. These were most secret documents on Katyn, evidence of the crimes of the Stalinist regime. He was all the more shocked because Gorbachev spoke with striking calmness, as if Yakovlev had not asked him repeatedly to instruct the Presidential Archive to look for those documents. Gorbachev later wrote in his memoirs that his calm demeanor had been due to the fact that these documents were not in any way new by December of 1991. Now, ultimately, internal Russian politics led to the public disclosure of the Politburo decision and other secret documents concerning the crime. When Yeltsin faced strong opposition from the Russian Communist Party, he issued a decree delegalizing it. Communist deputies in the Duma protested that the decree was unconstitutional. The issue was placed before the Constitutional Court. Yeltsin decided that one of the many documents to be presented as evidence of the criminal nature of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was this Politburo decision from March 5, 1940, to shoot the Polish POWs. On October 14, 1992, Russian archivist Rudolf Pihoya presented it in Yeltsin's name to Wałęsa in Warsaw. The same day, the Politburo's decision appeared in a report by TASS. Nevertheless, the protocols of the NKVD Special Board, the so-called Belarusian list of the prisoners held in Western Belarus and exterminated on the basis of the decision from March 5th, had not been found. The Polish Military Archival Commission gained access to a large number of archival documents relating to Polish POWs held in the Soviet Union in 1939-41. Photocopies of over 1 million pages were made and deposited in the military archives in Warsaw. At the recommendation of the presidents of Russia and Poland, 2 Russian language and 4 Polish language volumes of Katyn documents, see the 4 volumes in Polish there, were published in 1995 to 2006, co-edited by Dr. Natalia Lebedeva and Professor Wojciech Materski. In 2007, Yale University Press published the American edition of the documents, co-edited by Professor Cienciala, Professor Lebedeva, and Professor Materski. The 3, also right there, the 3 cemeteries in Katyn, Yednoye, and Kharkov were officially opened in 2000. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Supreme Prosecutor of the USSR was renamed as the main military prosecutor of the Russian Federation. The investigation, numbered 159, into the Katyn massacre had been ongoing for 14 years. By mid-June 1994, Anatoly Yablokov, then the Russian military prosecutor in charge of the Katyn case, proposed that Stalin and his close collaborators in the Politburo be judged guilty of the Katyn crime on the basis of Article 6, points A, B, and C of the Charter of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. That is of crimes against peace, of war crimes, and crimes against humanity aimed at Polish citizens. Jabłakow's motion was rejected by the main military prosecutor's office. The investigation was closed in 2004, but no documentation was made public before May of 2010, after the Smolensk catastrophe. On this day, the president of the Russian Federation, Medvedev, gave to Komorowski 67 Katyn volumes out of a total of 182. Today, more than 140 volumes have been given. Revealing the full details of this crime is both an act of repentance before the people of Poland and a debt owed to the people of Russia, deeply interested that similar things should never take place again on their land. That's the end of Professor Lebedev's text.
Dear Professor, thank you.